I lost my son. Not to an accident, not to illness, but to something far more preventable. And before you think this is another story about wealth or fame or the price of ambition, let me stop you right there. This is about something much simpler and infinitely more devastating. This is about the moments I thought I could postpone, the presents I thought I could replace with presents, and the child who needed a father but got a CEO instead. My daughter Vivian is gone from my life. And when I say it's my fault, I don't mean it in some abstract, philosophical way. I mean I made specific choices, day after day, year after year, that built a wall between us so high that by the time I realized what I'd done, she'd already stopped trying to climb it. Let me take you back to a moment most people don't know about. It was 2002, and I was holding my first son, Nevada, in my arms. He was 10 weeks old, with these tiny fingers that would wrap around mine, and eyes that looked at me like I was his entire universe. I remember thinking, this is it, this is what everything is for. All the companies, all the dreams about Mars and electric cars, they were all suddenly just background noise compared to this little human who needed me. And then he died. Sudden infant death syndrome. One moment he was there, and the next moment there was just this crushing absence that I couldn't code my way out of, couldn't engineer a solution for, couldn't innovate past. I held my dead son in my arms, and something inside me made a decision that I wouldn't fully understand for 20 years. I decided that feeling that much pain meant I'd felt too much, been too present, been too vulnerable. So I built armor made of ambition. Here's what nobody tells you about losing a child: it doesn't make you hold the others closer. Sometimes, and I'm ashamed to say this, sometimes it makes you step back because you're terrified of feeling that depth of loss again. So when the twins came, Griffin and Vivian, I loved them fiercely, but I loved them from inside a fortress. I threw myself into Tesla with a kind of manic intensity that people mistook for passion but was really just sophisticated running away. We were months from bankruptcy. I was sleeping on the factory floor, eating lunch in 7 minutes, taking meetings while my phone died because I couldn't find time to charge it, and I told myself, I'm doing this for them. I'm building a future where they'll be proud of their father, where they'll understand that sometimes you have to sacrifice the small moments for the big mission. But here's the secret nobody tells you about children: they don't think in missions. They think in Tuesdays. They think in bedtimes and breakfast, and whether dad knows the name of their stuffed animal. Vivian was 8 years old when she started asking why I missed her school play. Not crying, not angry, just genuinely curious, like she was trying to understand the logic. And I gave her logic. I explained about the production line issues, about how many jobs depended on us solving this problem, about how what I was doing today would change transportation forever. She nodded like she understood. But what she actually understood was that the world was more important to me than her Tuesday. The twins turned into teenagers, and then came the triplets, Kai, Saxon, and Damien. 5 kids with my first wife, Justine. And I was so busy trying to prevent Tesla from collapsing and SpaceX from becoming another aerospace punchline that I outsourced presents. I had nannies, I had schedules, I had systems, everything optimized except the one thing that actually mattered. I remember Justine telling me once, they don't need another employee, Elon, they need their father, and I got defensive. I listed all the ways I provided, all the opportunities I was creating, all the experiences they'd have because of what I was building. I won the argument. I lost something much more important. Here's something I've never publicly admitted until recently: I kept a photo of Nevada in my wallet for years. Not in my phone, in my actual wallet, this tiny printed picture that got more worn and faded with time. I'd look at it sometimes between meetings and feel this ache, this reminder of what I'd lost, but instead of letting that ache teach me to hold tighter to the children I still had, I let it reinforce my belief that distance was safer, that emotional protection meant emotional distance. I became so good at compartmentalizing that I could go weeks without really seeing my children, even when they were in the same house. I'd be there physically, but mentally I was solving engineering problems, fighting Twitter battles, planning Mars missions. My body showed up. My attention was colonizing another planet. Vivian started pulling away around 13. The signs were there: the way she'd stopped talking when I entered a room, the way she stopped asking me questions about my work, the way she'd look at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Was it disappointment? Resignation? I told myself it was just teenage stuff, that all kids go through phases where they reject their parents. I didn't realize she wasn't rejecting me, she was protecting herself from continuing to expect something I'd proven I wouldn't give. She was doing to me what I'd done to the memory of Nevada. She was building armor. Then came 2020, and the world locked down, and suddenly I had no excuse. We were all home. All the factories were closed, all the launches were delayed, and there was just time. Uncomfortable, unavoidable time with my family. And you know what I discovered? I didn't know my children. Not really. I knew their schedules and their schools and their medical histories, but I didn't know what made Vivian laugh, what scared her, what she dreamed about when she let herself dream. We were strangers who shared DNA and a last name, and nothing else that mattered. I tried to bridge that gap during those months. I really did. But it's like trying to build a relationship in a language you never bothered to learn. Every conversation felt mechanical. Forced, like I was running code that kept producing error messages I didn't know how to debug. In 2022, Vivian turned 18 and filed legal papers to change her name. She didn't just change her last name, she erased Musk entirely, like she was debugging me out of her identity code. The reason she gave in the legal documents is burned into my memory. She no longer wished to be related to her biological father in any way, shape, or form. Not because I was abusive, not because I was cruel, but because I wasn't there. Because I'd chosen everything else over her, repeatedly, consistently, until she stopped believing I'd ever choose differently. And the worst part? I got angry first. My initial reaction wasn't grief or understanding, it was defensive rage. I went on podcasts and blamed progressive schools, blamed ideology, blamed the woke mind virus for stealing my son. But here's the truth I've had to face in the long, quiet hours since then. Ideology didn't steal my child. I gave her away in increments so small I didn't notice until the sum total equaled absence. She didn't need me to save the world from climate change. She needed me to show up to her gender questioning with openness instead of agenda. She needed me to ask what she was feeling instead of telling her what I thought about social movements. She needed a father who was curious about her, not a futurist who was threatened by her future, looking different than the one I'd imagined. I have other children now, younger ones with different mothers. And I catch myself doing the same things. I catch myself taking that one last meeting, sending that one last email, fixing that one last problem while they're asking me to play. And every time, I hear this voice in my head that sounds like Vivian, at 8 years old, asking why I missed her play, and it asks, is this really more important? Is this really the moment you want to trade? Because here's what I've learned the hardest way possible: you cannot buy back time. I can buy anything else on Earth. I could probably figure out how to buy things not on Earth. But I cannot purchase a single Tuesday from 2010. I cannot acquire those moments in the market. They're gone, and so is the daughter who needed me during them. People see me as this figure who's revolutionizing transportation and pushing humanity toward the stars. And they're not wrong. But I'm also a father who revolutionized himself right out of his child's life, who pushed so hard toward the future that I forgot to be present in the present. And now I have all this success, all this impact, all this legacy, and my daughter won't even carry my name. She looked at everything I built and decided it wasn't worth being associated with the man who built it while neglecting her. That's not a business failure. That's not a PR crisis. That's a dad who failed at the only job that actually matters. So when I say I lost my son, I need you to understand what I mean. I lost the relationship. I lost the trust. I lost the 1,000 small moments that build a bond strong enough to weather disagreement and difference. I lost the right to be part of her story in any meaningful way because I treated her story as less important than my own. And the truly devastating part? She gave me so many chances. Children are absurdly generous with second chances. They'll forgive you for missing dinner if you make breakfast special. They'll forgive missing the game if you ask about it with genuine interest. They'll forgive almost anything except the pattern of proving they're not the priority. I made them the mission statement but not the mission. I made them the reason I worked but not the reason I came home. And by the time I understood the difference, Vivian had already learned to stop needing me. She didn't do it with anger or drama. She just quietly, methodically built a life where my absence didn't hurt anymore because my presence had never been consistent enough to matter. That's not teenage rebellion. That's emotional survival, and I taught her she needed to survive me. If you're watching this and you have children, I need you to understand something that took me losing one to learn. They will not wait for you to finish building your empire. They will not pause their childhood until you're less busy, until the company stabilizes, until you've achieved whatever milestone you think will finally be enough. They're growing right now, this moment, while you're watching this. And every moment you're choosing something else is a moment you're teaching them where they rank in your hierarchy of importance. You cannot tell them they're your priority while your behavior demonstrates they're your afterthought. Children are fluent in the language of attention. They know the difference between being scheduled and being chosen. I thought Vivian was the wake-up call. I thought losing her would finally teach me the lesson I needed to learn. But the truth is far more devastating than that. Vivian wasn't the first warning sign. She wasn't even the second. She was just the one who finally made it official, who put it in legal documents where I couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't rationalize it away, couldn't tell myself that everything would be fine once we got through this next crisis. The pattern was there all along, written in the lives of all my children, and I was too busy disrupting industries to notice I was destroying the one thing that can't be disrupted back into existence, a father-child bond. Let me tell you about the twins, Griffin and Vivian, before she changed her name. They came into this world together in 2004, 2 years after Nevada died, and I made all these promises to myself about being different this time. I wasn't going to be like my own father, distant and harsh. I was going to be present, involved, the kind of dad who knew his kids. But here's the insidious thing about patterns: they don't announce themselves. They creep in through 1,000 small justifications. Just this one weekend at the factory. Just this one birthday where I'm on a call. Just this one school year where things are crazy. And suddenly it's not one anything, it's everything. Griffin, my son, he's quiet. Always has been. While Vivian was asking questions and pushing back, Griffin just observed. He'd watch me come home late, watch me at dinner on my phone, watch me promise to play and then get pulled away by an emergency that somehow always seemed to be more urgent than building a fort or reading a story. And he just absorbed it all silently. People think the children who complain are the ones suffering most. But sometimes it's the quiet ones who are learning the most dangerous lesson: that their needs are too much, that they should compress themselves to fit into the margins of your life. Griffin never legally changed his name, never made a public statement about our relationship. He just faded. We exist in the same family but not in the same story anymore, and that's somehow worse than Vivian's clean break. At least she was honest about the distance. Griffin and I just pretend it doesn't exist, while it grows wider every year. Then came the triplets in 2006, Kai, Saxon, and Damien. 3 babies at once, and Tesla was bleeding money so fast I was having nightmares about bankruptcy. SpaceX had just had our second rocket failure, and everyone in aerospace was saying I was a rich idiot playing at rocket science. I had 3 newborns at home and 2 companies on life support, and I made a choice. I chose the companies. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd make it up to them, that providing for their future was the same as being present in their present. But it wasn't temporary. It became my operating system. Crisis became my comfort zone because in crisis I knew what to do. I could fix a production line. I couldn't fix the look in my children's eyes when I missed another recital, another game, another ordinary Tuesday that was extraordinary to them. Saxon, my middle triplet, he reminds me so much of myself it's terrifying. He's brilliant, intense, completely absorbed in whatever he's working on. And I watch him disappearing into projects the same way I disappeared into companies, and I wonder, is he actually like me, or did he learn that's how you survive having a father like me? Did he inherit my tendency toward obsession? Or did he develop it as an adaptation to a household where the only way to connect with Dad was to be working on something important enough to warrant attention? I'll never know. That's what haunts me. I'll never know which parts of my children are naturally them and which parts are scar tissue from the wounds my absence created. Here's something that keeps me up at night. I have 11 living children across 3 different families, and I cannot tell you with confidence what any of them dream about. Not their career dreams or their ambitions, but what they actually dream about when they sleep. What monsters chase them, what fantasies comfort them, what their subconscious minds are processing while they're vulnerable in the dark. A father should know these things. A father should be the person they tell about the nightmare, the person whose presence makes the darkness less scary, but I outsourced nighttime. I had other people do bedtime, other people handle the 3 a.m. wake-ups, other people be the comfort in the darkness. I was busy building tunnels under Los Angeles and planning cities on Mars, and I missed the whole point that presence in the dark, ordinary moments, is what builds the foundation for everything else. There's this song, Cats in the Cradle, by Harry Chapin, and I used to hear it and think it was sentimental nonsense. A father too busy to play, a son who grows up to be just like him, too busy for his aging dad. It seemed like such obvious moralizing. Of course you make time for your kids. Of course you don't let work consume everything. But then I learned the story behind that song. Harry Chapin's wife wrote a poem about fathers who keep saying we'll have time later, until later becomes never. Harry turned it into a song, and then spent his entire career performing it, which meant touring constantly, being away from his own children, living out the exact warning he was singing about. He died in a car accident at 38, still on the road, still away from home, still caught in the same trap he'd spent years warning others about. And I thought, that's not me. I'm self-aware. I see the trap. But self-awareness without behavior change is just sophisticated self-deceit. I need to tell you about the trap I fell into. because I see so many of you falling into it right now, and it's killing me to watch. It's the trap of justified absence, and it's more dangerous than any business failure because it comes wrapped in nobility. It comes dressed up as sacrifice and mission and higher purpose, and by the time you realize it's destroyed what matters most, the damage is irreversible. Let me explain how this trap works. Because I didn't just stumble into it, I sprinted into it with my eyes wide open, believing I was doing something heroic. Here's the rationalization I lived inside for decades. I'm not just building companies. I'm literally trying to save humanity from extinction. Tesla isn't a car company, it's our best shot at solving climate change before we cook ourselves off this planet. SpaceX isn't about rockets, it's about making humanity multiplanetary so that one asteroid doesn't end everything we've ever been or done. Neuralink could help paralyzed people walk, could solve brain diseases, could merge human consciousness with AI before AI leaves us behind. These aren't ego projects or vanity startups. These are species-level existential missions. So when I missed Vivian's school events, when I wasn't there for Griffin's birthday, when I forgot Saxon even had a soccer game, I had the ultimate excuse. I'm not at your recital because I'm trying to ensure humans survive long enough to have recitals. And here's the truly insidious part: that argument isn't entirely wrong. Someone does need to solve these problems. Someone does need to push humanity forward. The work is legitimately important. But that kernel of truth becomes the poison that lets you ignore the larger truth. Your child doesn't need humanity saved. They need you. Not humanity's savior, not the CEO, not the revolutionary, you. The person who knows how they like their breakfast. The person who can tell when they're sad even when they're smiling. The person who shows up not because it's scheduled but because they're your child and you want to be there. I remember this one specific moment that should have woken me up but didn't. It was 2016, and we were having another production crisis at Tesla. The Model 3 line was what I called production hell. We were hemorrhaging money, I was sleeping at the factory, showering in the locker room, eating snack packs at my desk because I didn't have time for actual meals. I hadn't seen my kids in almost 3 weeks. And one night, around 2 in the morning, I'm staring at this assembly robot that keeps failing, and my phone rings. It's my son, I won't say which one to protect his privacy, and he's crying. Not toddler crying, but that teenage boy crying where they're trying so hard not to cry that it comes out in these choked sounds that break your heart. He'd had his first real heartbreak. Some girl had devastated him, and he needed his dad. And I talked to him. I did. For maybe 7 minutes, while I was watching the engineering team try another fix. I said the right things. This happens to everyone. You'll get through this. There are other fish in the sea, all the standard dad stuff. And then I told him I had to go because we were in the middle of solving a critical problem, but I'd call him back in the morning. He said okay. He always said okay. And I went back to the robot problem, and we fixed it around dawn. And I felt this rush of accomplishment because we'd solved it. We'd kept the production line from falling further behind. I'd saved jobs. I'd kept the company alive another day. I never called him back that morning. I got pulled into another crisis, then another meeting. Then by the time I remembered, it had been 3 days, and the moment had passed. He never brought it up again. He learned the lesson I was teaching. Dad's robots matter more than your heart. The mission comes first. Your pain can wait. And I told myself he was fine, that he was resilient, that this was teaching him important lessons about priorities in the real world. But what I was actually teaching him was that he couldn't count on me when it mattered. That I'd answer the phone but I wouldn't actually show up. That I was everyone else's problem solver but I wouldn't make time to solve what hurt him. Here's what nobody tells you about being someone doing important work. It gives you permission to be a terrible father, and everyone around you will enable it. People would tell me all the time, your kids are so lucky, they must be so proud, they understand you're changing the world, and I believed them. I believed that my children were getting something better than my presence. They were getting purpose by proxy, legacy by association, meaning through my mission. I actually convinced myself that missing their childhoods was a gift I was giving them because of what I was building for their future. The psychological research has a term for this now, though I didn't know it then. It's called prestigious abandonment, and it's particularly damaging because the child can't even process their anger properly. If your dad is a drunk who misses your events, you're allowed to be mad. Society supports your anger. But if your dad misses your events because he's literally trying to save the world, you feel guilty for wanting him there. You feel selfish for needing him. You feel small for thinking your school play matters compared to climate change or space exploration. It creates this loyalty bind where children betray their own needs to support the mission they've been told is more important than them. Vivian lived in that bind for years. I know this now because of things she said in therapy, things that got back to me through lawyers, through other family members, through the paperwork of our disconnection. She said she felt like she was competing with humanity for her father's attention. And humanity had billions of people while she was just one. She said she learned to make herself smaller, to need less, to ask for less, because asking felt like she was being the villain in some grand story about saving the species. She actually apologized to her therapist for being upset that I missed her stuff, because she knew objectively that Tesla's survival was more important than her feelings. An 8-year-old child apologizing for having needs, that's what my justified absence created. And here's where it gets even darker. I wasn't just absent, I was self-righteous about it. When Justine would tell me I needed to be more present, I'd get frustrated. I'd ask her if she understood what was at stake, if she grasped that Tesla was months from bankruptcy, that if we failed, electric vehicles would be set back a decade, that climate change would accelerate, that thousands of jobs would evaporate. I'd make her feel unreasonable for asking me to be at dinner. I'd position her very reasonable requests for basic parenting as her not understanding the magnitude of what we were trying to accomplish. I was so drunk on mission that I made being a present father seem pedestrian, even selfish. I see this everywhere now, and it terrifies me. I see founders who use me as permission. If Elon can miss his kids' lives to build rockets, I can miss mine to build my startup. I see fathers who quote my work ethic, my hours, my sleeping at the factory, stories like they're instruction manuals instead of warnings. I've become the patron saint of justified absence, and I'm watching an entire generation of ambitious fathers use my example to rationalize their own vanishing act. And I want to grab them by the shoulders and scream, I'm not the hero of this story. I'm the cautionary tale. Look at what it cost me. Look at what I lost. Because here's the truth that took me losing a child to understand. You can rebuild a company. You can pivot when you fail. You can recover from bankruptcy. I've done it multiple times. You can overcome technical problems, market crashes, production disasters. Business is anti-fragile if you're stubborn and smart and lucky. But childhood? Childhood is fragile. It happens once, in real time, with no do-overs. You cannot patch it. You cannot iterate on it. You cannot pivot to a new version where you get those years back. Vivian is 21 now. Those years from 8 to 18, the years where she was figuring out who she was, where she was dealing with gender identity questions, where she was navigating school and relationships, and becoming a person. I wasn't there for them. Not really. I was there in theory, there on paper, there financially, but I wasn't there in the way that builds the kind of trust that survives disagreement. And no amount of success, no number of successful launches, no valuation, no mission to Mars will ever give me back those moments. They're gone. And so is the relationship we could have built during them. Let me tell you what keeps me up at night now. And it's not production numbers or quarterly earnings. It's imagining Vivian at 14, struggling with questions about her identity, maybe reaching for her phone to call me, and then remembering that I probably won't answer. Or if I do answer, I'll be distracted, I'll be half present, I'll be solving some problem that seems more urgent than her confusion. So she doesn't call, she figures it out alone, or with friends, or with people who aren't me. And every time she makes that choice, not to reach out because she's learned I won't really be there, a little more of our connection dies. Death by 1,000 unreturned calls. Abandonment by accumulation. The missions are still important, I'm not saying they're not. Climate change is real, space exploration matters, advancing technology is crucial for humanity's future. But I'm saying this, it's a false choice. The trap is making you believe that being great at your mission and being present for your children are opposites, that you have to choose, that sacrifice means sacrificing them. That's the lie. The truth is messier and harder. You can do both, but it requires treating your children's time as sacred as your mission, protecting family moments with the same ferocity you protect your work, saying no to opportunities that would make you miss the irreplaceable. I didn't learn this in time. I kept believing there would be time later, that once Tesla stabilized, once SpaceX got to orbit, once the next crisis passed, then I'd focus on family. But there's always another crisis, there's always another emergency. The mission never stops demanding everything. If you don't draw boundaries, if you don't protect presence with the same intensity you protect your work, the mission will consume everything, including the people you're supposedly doing it all for. And here's the final, devastating irony. Vivian doesn't care about any of it. She doesn't care that Tesla helped accelerate the electric vehicle revolution. She doesn't care that SpaceX revolutionized space access. She doesn't care about the mission to Mars, or the Hyperloop, or any of it, because none of it includes her. I built this legacy that I thought would make my children proud. that they'd inherit and appreciate and understand was worth the sacrifice. And my daughter looked at all of it and said, I don't want any of this. I don't want the name. I don't want the association. I don't want the legacy. Because what I wanted was a father, and that's the one thing you never built for me. That's the cost of justified absence. Not that your mission fails, my missions have largely succeeded, but that you succeed at everything except what matters most, and by the time you realize it, the people who needed you have learned to stop needing you. And you're left with all this achievement and impact and legacy, standing alone in the middle of it, realizing you built a monument to your own absence from the lives that mattered most. So let me tell you what I'm really afraid of. And it's not another rocket explosion, or Tesla going bankrupt, or even dying before we get to Mars. What terrifies me, what keeps me awake in those rare hours when I'm not working, is that I've become the example. I've become the permission slip that a generation of fathers are using to justify their own absence. I see my face on motivational posters with quotes about outworking everyone, about sacrifice, about sleeping on factory floors. I see young entrepreneurs citing my schedule as proof that you have to choose between family and changing the world. And I want to travel back in time and tear down every interview where I bragged about my work hours, every tweet where I glorified the grind, every moment where I made obsessive workaholism look like the price of greatness instead of what it actually was, a sophisticated form of running away. Because here's what I've realized too late. I didn't work those insane hours because I'm some superhuman dedicated to humanity's future. I worked those hours because it was easier than being present. It was easier to solve an engineering problem than to sit with my children's emotions. It was easier to optimize a production line than to figure out why my daughter was pulling away. It was easier to argue with people on Twitter about physics than to have an actual vulnerable conversation with my own family. Work gave me clear problems with clear solutions and clear metrics for success. Family gave me messy, unsolvable, ongoing emotional complexity that I couldn't code my way out of. So I chose work and called it sacrifice. I chose absence and called it mission. I chose everything that felt like progress, while the most important relationships in my life slowly died from neglect. And now I see it everywhere. I see it in Silicon Valley where founders talk about their companies like children while their actual children are being raised by nannies and iPads. I see it in the finance world where men work 90-hour weeks and tell themselves they're providing for their families while their families would trade the bigger house for a dad at dinner. I see it in medicine, in law, in academia, in every field where ambitious people convince themselves that their contribution to the world justifies their absence from their children's lives. And they all point to people like me as proof that it works, that the sacrifice is worth it, that their kids will understand someday. But let me tell you what someday actually looks like. Someday looks like legal documents where your child formally requests to remove your name from their identity. Someday looks like holidays where you're technically invited but everyone can feel the weight of all the holidays you missed getting there. Someday looks like your children having lives you know nothing about, friends you've never met, dreams they'd never think to share with you because you've proven over years and years that you're not actually interested unless it relates to your definition of important. Someday looks like success, in every metric except the one that matters, and by the time you understand that, the people who needed you have already built lives that work around your absence. I posted something cryptic on social media once, just 3 words, I will never let you go. Most people thought it was about business or technology or some product launch. A few people close to me knew the truth, it was about my children. It was a promise made too late, shouted into the void because I'd lost the right to say it directly to the people it was meant for. It was the desperate vow of a father who'd finally realized what he'd lost but didn't know how to get it back. Because you can't just decide one day to be present and expect people who've learned to live without you to suddenly need you again. Trust isn't built in moments of crisis or big dramatic gestures. It's built in 1,000 ordinary moments of showing up, and I'd missed most of those moments. Here's the thing about time that I understood intellectually but not emotionally until it was too late. It only moves in one direction, and childhood occupies a very specific, very brief window within it. Vivian is 21 now. The version of her that was 8 years old, that still believed I'd show up, that still wanted me at her school events, that version doesn't exist anymore. She didn't pause her development waiting for me to finish my mission. She grew up, and she grew up learning that I wasn't reliable, that my attention was conditional, that she had to be in crisis or extraordinary to merit my focus. The ordinary her, the everyday her, the her that just needed a dad at breakfast that her learned she wasn't enough to compete with email and rocket launches and production targets. And I cannot get those years back. I can't rewind to when she was struggling with her identity and be the safe, supportive, curious presence she needed. I can't go back to middle school and know her friends and understand her world. I can't return to high school and be someone she trusted, with her fears and hopes and dreams. Those opportunities had expiration dates, and I let them expire while I was busy with things that seemed more urgent but weren't more important. I treated my children's childhoods like they were infinite resources I could tap into whenever I had spare time, not realizing that every moment I postponed was a moment that would never come again. You can rebuild a company. I've done it. Tesla was weeks from bankruptcy multiple times, and we survived. SpaceX's first 3 rockets exploded, and we kept going. I've faced technical problems that seemed impossible and solved them through iteration and persistence and refusing to give up. But you know what you can't iterate on? You can't iterate on your daughter's 8th birthday. It happens once. You can't pivot when you miss your son's first heartbreak. Either you're there for it or you're not, and if you're not, he learns to handle heartbreak without you. You can't recover from years of absence by working harder at presence later. The compound interest of disconnection is vicious. Every missed moment makes the next moment harder. Every time you don't show up, you make it easier for them to stop expecting you to show up. Eventually, they build a life that works without you. And by the time you're ready to show up, there's no space for you anymore. Let me tell you about someone who figured this out in time. Someone whose story haunts me because it shows what I could have done differently. Johann Sebastian Bach had 20 children. 20. He was one of the greatest composers in human history, working constantly, creating music that would outlive him by centuries. He had every excuse to be absent. He was literally a genius with a finite amount of time to create works that would define Western music. But you know what he did? He taught his children music himself. He performed with them. He created alongside them. Several of his children became renowned musicians, not because of his name but because he was actually present in their development. His legacy isn't just his compositions, it's the relationships he composed into his daily life. He proved you can be great at your work and present for your children, but it requires making their time sacred, non-negotiable, as important as the work itself. Or look at someone closer to my world, Dwayne Johnson. The Rock watched his own father miss his childhood for wrestling, for the career, for the grind. And when he became successful, massively successful, he made a different choice. He talks about his daughters constantly. He protects time with them ferociously. He said explicitly, "I can be successful and present. Those aren't opposites." He posts videos playing Tea Party, doing his daughter's hair, being silly with them. And some people mock him for it, say it's not masculine or whatever, but you know what? His daughters will grow up knowing without question that they were their father's priority. They won't have to compete with his career for his attention. They won't have to make legal declarations about not wanting his name. He figured out what I didn't, that you can be a titan in your field and still show up to breakfast. But I made a different choice, repeatedly, for years, and now I'm living with consequences that no amount of wealth or innovation can fix. Vivian doesn't want a relationship with me. Not because I was cruel or abusive, but because I was absent, and that absence taught her that I wasn't someone she could depend on. And the truly devastating part is that she's not wrong. Looking at the father I wasn't dependable for the things that mattered to a child. I was dependable for business meetings and product launches and solving technical crises, but I wasn't dependable for bedtime stories and school events, and being present when she needed to talk. I failed at the most basic requirement of fatherhood: being there. So when I say this is my fault, I don't mean it in some vague, philosophical way, where we all bear some responsibility for complex family dynamics. I mean I made specific, repeated choices that created this outcome. I chose email over breakfast thousands of times. I chose production meetings over school plays dozens of times. I chose Twitter arguments over real conversations. I chose the dopamine hit of solving business problems over the slower, harder work of building emotional intimacy. And each choice felt justified in the moment. There was always a reason, always a crisis, always something that seemed more urgent. But urgency isn't the same as importance, and I spent decades confusing the two. Now I have younger children, Exa, Technomechanicus, and others, different mothers, different circumstances, but the same fundamental question: will I repeat the pattern or break it? And I'm trying. I'm genuinely trying to be more present, to protect family time, to show up for the ordinary moments. But it's hard when your brain has been wired for decades to see work as the solution to everything. It's hard when the companies still need me, when there are still missions to complete, when there are still crises that feel urgent. It's hard to unlearn patterns that brought you success in one domain, even as they destroyed you in another. And I can feel myself slipping sometimes. Taking that one extra meeting. Checking email during playtime. Letting work thoughts dominate family dinners. The old patterns calling to me like muscle memory. like an addiction. And every time I catch myself, I think about Vivian. I think about the legal documents. I think about a child who loved me deciding that the cost of continuing to love me was too high. And I force myself to put down the phone, close the laptop, be present even when it feels uncomfortable, even when my brain is screaming that there are more important things I should be doing. Because here's what I've finally learned. There is nothing more important than this. Not Tesla, not SpaceX, not Neuralink or the Boring Company or Twitter or any of it. Those are projects. They'll exist or they won't. They'll succeed or they'll fail. Other people can run them, improve them, maybe even do them better than me. But my children? I'm their father. That's not a role someone else can fill. That's not a job I can hire out or optimize or automate. And the window for doing it right is so much shorter than you think. Your children don't need you to be Elon Musk. They don't need you to change the world or revolutionize industries or build companies worth billions. They need you to know their favorite color. They need you to notice when they're sad even when they say they're fine. They need you to show up to the ordinary moments not because they're convenient, not because they fit your schedule, but because your children are having them and that makes them extraordinary. They need you to choose them over your phone, over your email, over your next big idea. They need you to prove through your actions, not your words, that they are your priority. And if you can't do that, if your mission is truly so important that you cannot make time for breakfast or bedtime or being present in the ordinary moments of your children's lives, then you need to ask yourself an honest question. What are you actually building all of this for? If the answer is for them or for my family or for their future, but your behavior demonstrates that they're not worth your present, then you're lying to yourself. You're not building for them. You're building instead of them. You're choosing the abstract idea of providing for their future over the concrete reality of being present in their now. My daughter looked at everything I built, the electric vehicle revolution, the private space industry, the billions of dollars, the historical significance, and she decided none of it was worth being associated with the man who built it while neglecting her. Let that sink in. I offered her the world, and she chose obscurity and distance, because the world didn't include what she actually needed, which was a father who showed up, not a visionary, not a CEO, not a revolutionary, just a dad who was there. So this is my warning, and it comes from the deepest place of regret I've ever known. Your children are growing right now. This moment while you're reading this, they're getting older. They're having experiences, forming memories, learning lessons about their worth based on where you spend your attention. And every moment you choose something else is a moment you're teaching them where they rank in your hierarchy of importance. You cannot tell them they're your priority while your calendar proves they're your afterthought. Children are fluent in the language of attention. They know the difference between being loved in theory and being loved in practice. The choice is still yours. For now. But that for now has an expiration date. And you don't know when it is. You don't know which missed bedtime will be the one where they stop asking you to come. You don't know which school event will be the last one they invite you to before they stop expecting you to show up. You don't know when the window closes, when the damage becomes permanent, when later becomes never. What you do know is that it's happening faster than you think, and once it's gone, no amount of success, no amount of achievement, no amount of legacy building will bring it back. I lost my son. I lost him to my own justified absence, my own mission-driven blindness, my own inability to understand that being present was the mission. And now I'm telling you this not because I've figured it out, not because I've fixed it, but because I'm living with the irreversible consequences of not figuring it out in time. Don't make the same mistake. Don't be the cautionary tale. Don't wait until legal documents force you to confront what your choices have cost. Your children don't need you to save the world. They need you at dinner. They need you to know their friends' names. They need you to show up before it's too late to matter. The choice is still yours. Choose them. Choose now. Before now becomes never, and all your success becomes just expensive loneliness with no one left who wants to share it.